Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much to our wonderful international expert on the School Autonomy and Social Justice Australian Research Council grant, Professor Lisbeth Lundahl from Umeå University in Sweden. And Lisbeth, it's lovely to have you here, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. So yes. The first question is, where do notions of school autonomy come from in Sweden?
Well, I would say that there was a continuous discussion, political discussion, in the 70s and 80s that resulted around 1990 in a set of reforms, which was very much about delegating responsibilities and giving quite a lot of freedom or autonomy to the local level from the state, because we used to have a very centralized system. So I would say that it was a discussion over several decades, resulting in far-going school and local autonomy in Sweden around 1990.
And what was the imperative, or what was the rationale for it? Why was this coming through, do you think?
Well, as I said, we had a rather strong state governing before this, and it was increasingly felt from both the right and the left side of the political field that one had to deregulate and decentralize, because there was critique both for education being too stiffly regulated. There was too little place for local influence, innovation, and from the right especially it was argued that schools were that they couldn't develop and couldn't be, education would be ineffective with that kind of state governing. So I think in a sense that there was a political consensus around this, but for various reasons. And in the case of the right-wing parties, it was also about opening up for private initiatives, but that came one step later, so to say. So there was an idea of giving professionals in schools much wider freedom to look at the local conditions and make use of resources in the best way, and also to develop, to open up for new ways of working to reach the goals more efficiently and so on. That kind of argumentation, which I think is nothing special for Sweden, of course.
And it's interesting you were saying that there was a consensus at that point between the left and the right-wing parties around that, although they might have had slightly different reasons for it, but they both agreed at the time.
Yes.
And you mentioned later on that the next step, maybe coming from the right-wing parties, was something quite dramatic in a way that's in Sweden.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how school autonomy started to play out in Sweden around that sort of opening up of the market?
You could say that was a necessary precondition for taking the next step, to introduce vouchers, to give tax funding to private schools. We used to have very, very few private schools, but from the early 90s, 92, 93, that there were a couple of freedom of choice reforms taken in the field of education. And actually Sweden is maybe one of the countries that today has the most extensive and education business in that field, having a very high percentage of the students at both compulsory and especially upper secondary level going to so-called free schools that are 100% tax funded. So a giant school market has developed, and this school market does not only concern free schools but public schools as well, because you have those individual vouchers. Schools have to compete over students and resources, so that affects, of course, head teachers' work a lot. And I led a research project some years ago called Upper Secondary Education as a Market, where we investigated how head teachers or principals, teachers, and work, and also the life of students was affected by this. And
what did you find? What did you find from that research?
Well, we found that it depended a bit on where you worked, if you look at teachers and head teachers, but in principle, all schools were affected. But mostly, if your school is situated in an urban region with lots of competing schools and competitors, and also if your school has not been that successful in competing, then it affects your work very much, because you are very eager to recruit students and retain them. Because every student means a sack of money. So and almost everyone was involved in marketing the school, public schools as well as free schools. And only those who were very popular could be a bit did not have to be that aggressive in their marketing and efforts to recruit students. So it is quite a new life in schools in that way.
And you mentioned about the impact on teachers' work. Can you talk a little bit about that? What did you see in terms of teachers' work or principal head teachers' work?
Well, even the teachers were involved in marketing. They were asked to sit down and think of, how can we develop the school, or actually how can we attract students? And teachers were telling about lowering the demands. They were telling about head teachers asking them to raise the grades, because otherwise it would look bad when recruiting new students. Things like that. Grade inflation. And we have seen grade inflation in Sweden because it's the teachers who do the grading.